you mentioned Rogan there, right? He's constantly couching his right-wing framing in, hey, I'm just a dude, I'm just a podcaster, don't take me super seriously, which I think is a real hallmark of right-wing influencers to a degree, is a denial that they are political, because it is a way to sell a right-wing framing to people who might not want to see themselves as a right-winger, particularly young men, when it's not terribly fashionable in my age group to be a right-winger. What were some of the hallmarks of his show that you found notable?
Yeah, so Rogan's a tricky figure because he's not got politics, he's got demographics. I think his first mission is to serve this very lucrative young male listening audience, 10 million, 11 million listeners per episode, to Spotify and to his advertisers. He's someone who's been on mic and doing stand-up and in the public eye long enough that he can plausibly affirm or deny any given political ideology. And he often does, right? He says, oh, I had Bernie Sanders on, but of course he flipped to Trump after Sanders dropped out. The point with Rogan, though, is not necessarily to catch him as a right-wing ideologue according to what he says, but it's the connections he has to all these other figures, many of whom we cover in the book, but all these other figures in the conservative political world, in the right-wing cultural universe, overwhelmingly picture him as somebody libertarian, as somebody right-wing sympathetic. So the recommendations, for instance, that pop up when you listen to the Rogan experience regularly are podcasters like Legion of Skanks, whom we talk about, Michael Malice, who then connect you to other further right, further fascist adjacent kind of nefarious characters who exist in the basement of this complex that we talk about. But I often have students tell me very understandably, oh, Rogan's my favorite podcaster because he just kind of tells it like it is. And it's easy to imagine, them hanging out with Rogan, just getting high and talking shit with their bros. And that's fine. I'm not here to judge anybody's preference for listening to that. But it's the industry built around Rogan. Once you go in the front door of what Rogan has to show you, he takes you back to the back room where a guy is going to sell you something even more sort of pernicious and influencing you to go further and further down this kind of fascist right-wing rabbit hole.
How do you respond to the Rogan fans who say, well, look, he's had Bernie Sanders on, or he's had Cornel West on, or he's had some lefties on? I mean, to me, I don't listen to Rogan at all, really, except for the purposes of my job to disentangle some of his right-wing stuff. But it's clear to me that those are outliers. But I'm curious what your response is to that claim.
The first response is what you just said. The centrist to left personalities he has on are outliers compared to the dozens and even hundreds of Milo Yiannopoulos' and Jordan Peterson's and all these people who become associated in a bigger context with conservative political causes and with right-wing cultural issues. The second bigger point that I would make is look at the industry built up around him. Look at who he hangs out with. Look at the shows that he guests on and the people who go to guest on other shows. Who does he go on tour with? Who are the sort of people advertising on his show? Over and over again, it pushes in the rightward direction and paints a picture of somebody who is skeptical of trans rights, right? All the sort of left-oriented issues we've been talking about. Overwhelmingly, he's angry about, skeptical of. He doesn't like institutional voices when it comes to COVID vaccines and on and on. So the small slice that he can point to justifiably saying, no, man, I'm pro-marijuana legalization, or I'm going to have Bernie Sanders on, pales in comparison to the bigger constellation of right-wing personalities that he pals around with.
And you mentioned just the ecosystem around him as well. Like Jordan Peterson, you could really draw a line to his career trajectory now as a almost exclusively anti-trans contributor to the Daily Wire, as a function of Rogan's platforming. I mean, that was very a huge instrumental to his rise.
Yeah, precisely. So Rogan kind of provides the joking entree into these more sort of self-serious political domains that Jordan Peterson occupies, or that various libertarian thinkers like him occupy as well. So the sort of comedy that forms the basis of how Rogan interacts with guests, the just bullshitting with the fellas kind of vibe, opens the door to more politically serious conversations and ideologies if a listener wishes to pursue them.
And lastly, speaking of Rogan guests, Gavin McInnes is someone you highlight in your final chapter, I believe, or chapter 5, where you and your co-author, who I believe, I'm so sorry I did not say his name, if you don't mind plugging him for a sec.
Yeah, it's Matt Sinkowitz.
Matt Sinkowitz, yes. You both write about the kind of final stage in a radicalization wormhole, which is basically neo-Nazi edgelord meme stuff, mm-hmm. Gavin McInnes, the Boogaloo Boys, these kinds of folks. That's when you get into incredibly scary territory, but it's also just the natural progression of when you fall into these radicalizing traps.
Yeah, so crucially, we're not saying that Greg Gutfeld, Joe Rogan are the same as these fascist and neo-Nazi podcasts we talk about later in the book. But our hope is to highlight that it's possible to get there, right? If you spend enough time in this right-wing comedy complex, you eventually get connected to via social media algorithms, via guests on various podcasts, recommendations to these sort of more nefarious characters. And indeed, it's not that tough to get there in the form of McInnes, who was a pretty regular guest on Fox News shows like Red Eye, which Greg Gutfeld hosted for years before getting his own show. He's circulated through the sort of hipster Vice universe of New York in the 2000s before turning hard into the right-wing universe and trying to be funny while doing it with this trolling vibe that he's got, right? Just kidding, just joking. As a leader of the Proud Boys, I don't endorse any of the sort of violent acts they're doing. That's all just a humorous facade, except and until his Proud Boys actually go out and beat up journalists and harass Black Lives Matter protesters. So he's among the more sort of above ground public faces of this sort of trolling universe that we describe. When you get to the really subterranean stuff, the things that Google won't even bring to your first couple of pages of searches, there are out and out Nazis who routinely joke about Holocaust and Jews who control media industries, right? They are not doing this with any sort of sheen of irony. They are very nakedly open about how hateful and fascistic they are in their ideas. But again, the element of owning the left, of making a sort of small in-group of fascist ideologues laugh along with you is core to their appeal. They're not just angry. They're not just hateful. They are making jokes in the same way that any other comedian might to create an in-group and an out-group.